Hi, everyone. My name is Sanders Kleinfeld, and I'm excited to welcome Caroline Cocciardi to Talks at Google today to discuss her book, Leonardo's Knot, a deep exploration of the intricate knot patterns that Leonardo da Vinci sketched in his codices and embedded in his most famous paintings, the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. This art book contains more than 140 photos, drawings, and paintings of da Vinci's knot work, featuring some new digital illustrations of some of Leonardo's most sophisticated knots by mathematician Rob Scharein. Caroline Cocciardi is a writer and filmmaker whose 20 years of research into Leonardo da Vinci commenced with an independent study when she was living in Rome. Her 2009 documentary, Mona Lisa Revealed, recounts the discoveries of Pascal Cote, the inventor of a multispectral imaging technique that uncovered hidden imagery beneath the surface of the Mona Lisa. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Caroline Cocciardi.
Hi, how are you?
Hello. We're ready to get started whenever you are.
Well, I brought with me today an exact 360 replica of the Mona Lisa painting. This is exactly what you would see at the Louvre Museum in Paris, France. Now, I know we think of the Mona Lisa as being really small, but as you can see, it's poster size. This is the exact height, width, and thickness of the board, if you could get that close and personal. Mona Lisa, the most famous painting in the world, done by Renaissance artist Leonardo da Vinci, who just celebrated his 500th anniversary of his death. Leonardo leaves us no clues about the Mona Lisa. We don't know whether she's rich or poor or titled. And with no contract being found, well, she remains a mystery. The only embellishment he leaves on the painting is a little embroidery found here at the bodice of her house dress. It's not going to reveal anything new about the model, but it will reveal something about Leonardo da Vinci, the artist, the mathematician, and the human being. I've blown up the embroidery really large so you could see the detail, but in actuality, it's only 1 inch in height by 4 inches in width. And for some reason, it's gone undetected for the last 500 years. You see, what we thought Leonardo painted on the Mona Lisa and what he actually painted on the Mona Lisa, well, it's as different as night and day. Of course, it's only covering 1/2 of 1% of a rather large poster-sized painting, but it's in that 1/2 of 1% that I discovered Leonardo da Vinci's heart and soul. And I call this embroidery pattern the Mona Lisa knot. Well, this is where I was standing when I discovered the Mona Lisa knot. In the mid-2000s, I was an art rep for a traveling exhibition of Mona Lisa photographs. When I was in Paris, I had met a French engineer who developed a camera that got access to the real Mona Lisa, that one day a year she comes out of her bulletproof box. And he photographed her at a high resolution of 240 million pixels. Well, from that photo shoot, these images traveled the world. And with this new technology, I could see any pixel on the Mona Lisa with absolute clarity. And I remember asking to see the embroidery blown up really large on the computer, but I didn't see the pattern. I was just too blown over by Leonardo's artistry. I mean, when you see it that close, the embroidery, every thread line is accounted for. He uses 2 colors. He uses a crimson red and an ochre yellow. You can actually see the indentation that he makes on the hunter green fabric where the needle would have pierced the fabric and caused tension. And then if that's not enough eye candy, you see the Mona Lisa knot floating through a transparent pleated veil. It's masterful. But I, like everybody else for the last 500 years, we saw what we wanted to see. We saw the motif of the day. We saw a chain of rings, 4-leaf clovers, teardrops. But what Leonardo da Vinci painted on the Mona Lisa had nothing to do with a chain of rings, 4-leaf clovers, and teardrops. It's September 2010. We had just opened the show in South Korea. And I do what I always do. I walk around the show. And for some reason, on that particular day, I'm standing in front of this gigantic Mona Lisa. And my eyes, of course, the Mona Lisa knot at this height is a good 12 inches in height. Anyway, my eyes and my brain focused. And what I saw was a bunch of diamonds all linked together. And there was nothing loopy about the pattern. Well, when I got home, I immersed myself into Italian fashion and motif of the day to try to figure out what the heck I saw. I've graphically laid out what Mona Lisa is wearing in the painting. She's wearing 3 garments. She's wearing an underblouse known as a camicia. She's wearing a house dress known as a gamora, and she's wearing a cape known as a scioppa. These 3 garments and where the Mona Lisa knot is located reveals the story. We're in Florence, the height of fashion and the fashion guild. And unlike today, there are rules about what you wear and when you wear it. Everything in this portrait of Mona Lisa has been handmade for her, even her underwear. When her dress is completed, its final stop is the embroidery guild. And logically, there's only 3 people that are going to be coming up with the Mona Lisa design. Mona Lisa, the embroiderer, or the artist Leonardo da Vinci. And when it became clear he was the artist and the inventor of the Mona Lisa knot, well, I realized what a big risk he took. You see, the Mona Lisa knot would have never been permitted on a frumpy green wool house dress. And he broke all fashion protocol of the day to do what he did. And then he spends 1 year on the 1 inch by 4 inch with a type of painting technique known as pointillism. It had been mighty important to him. Now, the consensus is the woman in the portrait is Lisa Gioconda, the wife of a wealthy silk merchant. And it would have been custom in practice for Francesco, the husband, to go to the artist Leonardo and ask for this commission. But it's always perplexed me, a wealthy silk merchant. Why wouldn't he have insisted on having his wife embellished in beautiful silks rather than in a frumpy green wool house dress? Well, the mysteries of the Mona Lisa continue. Now, you're probably wondering what a fruit farmer's daughter from Silicon Valley, in my youth, we were known as the Valley of Heart's Delight, is doing, making a major discovery on the most famous painting in the world that's eluded experts and laymen alike. Well, I have a long 20-year story, but really anybody could have seen what I saw. It was on the painting. It wasn't hidden. No x-ray was required. In fact, all Leonardo's knots are found on the pictorial level. You just had to look and see. It just so happened I was the one that saw it. Now, I know you and I think of Leonardo primarily as an artist, but really, he only painted a dozen so paintings, and that would have been considered a real small body of work for a painter of his day. So what is he doing with all of his time? Well, he's writing, and he's writing about every subject under the sun. So I'm going to give you a quick lesson on Leonardo's notebooks, also known as codexes or codici. He leaves us about 23 notebooks in a roughly 7,000 pages. Now, for me to exercise my hunch that Leonardo da Vinci is the inventor and the designer of the Mona Lisa knot, I needed to find his notebooks unabridged. And when I started, that was a tall order. You know, just for example, Codex Atlanticus, well over 1,000 pages, just to leaf through it exactly the way Leonardo wrote it. The only place I could find it was special collections at Stanford University Library. Remember, I'm just talking facsimiles. The real notebooks are locked up in vaults too valuable to see the light of day. Well, one of the reasons his notebooks are not available to the general public, they're not user-friendly. I mean, they look more like the disarray of a teenager's room. There could be 10, 15 calculations, drawings, inventory lists, grocery lists, all on one page. Today, he would be known as a radiant thinker. People always ask me, you know, can you read Leonardo's fangled way of writing? Right to left, upside down, 8 of a mirror. There's only a few on the planet that can't. I've met them, and their stories are all the same. Leonardo comes into their young life at 10 years old, and then just bam, straight away, they could read his fangled way of writing. I cannot, N-O-T. But I did know what a knot looked like, K-N-O-T. And I spent the next several years indexing and cataloging Leonardo's knots, which became my book, Leonardo's Knots. Now, the majority of the knots that I found, I plucked out in an array of other subject matters. But here's a page that Leonardo does where he dedicates, it's almost lyrical, these swirling montage that he puts together. This is today a very, very famous notebook page of his. We'll find it on book covers. And to tell the truth, you know, I had seen this page many, many times, but it wasn't until I was specifically looking for the Mona Lisa knot that I noticed something very out of character on this page. So Leonardo's in his studio. He's got the protractor, the quill. The lines are undulating over and under, in and out. But something happens in the upper left-hand corner. And whatever is going on in his mind, he's got to forego the protractor. And what he draws is he freehands 3 interlocking diamonds. And those 3 diamonds will become the center of the Mona Lisa knot. And he starts this preliminary drawing 10 years before he ever starts the Mona Lisa painting. I've graphically laid out the Mona Lisa knot for you. It's composed of 4 rows. 2 rope lines frame in a chain of octagons. And then the bottom row is made up of 6 cruciforms. Each one is flanked by 2 diamonds or hexagons. Other than in the very center, he changes the pattern to 3 diamonds, 3 hexagons. Now this is a blow up. We'd find this right at the breastbone of Mona Lisa. And look at this unusual crossing pattern that he does. From right to left, it goes over, and then he changes the sequence to the right. This is no accident. This is deliberate. And this is a Leonardo da Vinci knot. And I asked myself, why, Leonardo? Why did you do it? And what does it mean? Which I spend the next 10 years looking for that answer, which I'm going to tell you what I learned in this time we have together. Well, at the beginning of Leonardo's career, like other artists, Giotto, Raphael, they incorporated knots of antiquity into their paintings. The knot of Isis, found in hieroglyphics, always associated with a female goddess. Sacred meaning, the binding and releasing. The grandfather of knot, Solomon's knot. We find evidence of this dating as far back as 2700 BC in Iran. Its sacred meaning, man's connection to his creator. And Leonardo's absolute favorite, the eternity knot. If he could have been the designer and the inventor of the eternity knot, he would have been so pleased with himself. He loved this knot that much. Sacred meaning, no beginning, no end. These ancient symbols today, we'd call them logos or trademarks. When we see the sports brand Nike and we see the swoosh, we automatically know its tagline, just do it. These knots of antiquity are our universal logos. We find them on every continent from the ages. The only thing is we don't know who is the inventor or the designer, but their sacred meanings have never wavered. Well, now, once I found the Mona Lisa knot, I have a new set of glasses on. And now I look back at all Leonardo's paintings and I find a common denominator. They always have an interlocking knot somewhere, and it's always a little fun where you're going to find it. This painting by Leonardo is called The Annunciation. It was one of his earlier paintings. And on the forearm of Archangel Gabriel blowing in the wind is the knot of Isis. Now, perhaps Leonardo's fascination with knots was because of his surname, Vinci. In Italian, the verb would be vincere, which means to win or conquer. But in Latin, it would be vincules, meaning a bond, as described in Dante's literature Paradiso, a metaphorical bond, sweet bonds of love, dolce vinci. Now, I know you've all seen The Last Supper, but did you notice in the corner of the tablecloth the knot of Isis? A pretty deliberate gesture on Leonardo's part, don't you think? Perhaps Leonardo found a clever way of signing his paintings with a knot in lieu of a signature. You know, it wasn't custom and practice back then for artists to sign their works. Lady with the Ermine. This is Leonardo's very first portrait when he works for the Duke of Milan. It's the Duke's mistress, Cecilia, and Leonardo lavishes her in eternity knots. We find it in the shadows of her sleeve and the bodice of her dress. And then through digital restoration, we were able to detect this beautiful little eternity knot under her chin. Now, perhaps you heard about this painting in the news. Called Salvator Mundi, Savior of the World. It sold in 2007 at auction for a whopping $450 million. Like the Mona Lisa, the Salvator Mundi has a very intricate knot patterning system found on his robe, on the center medallion, and on the crisscross leather straps. With my collaboration with not mathematician, Dr. Rob Scharein, you'll see in this slide a bunch of different colors. These are strands that we are mapping. I don't have time to go into detail with you about this painting and the knot works, but I can tell you that the knot patterning on this Salvator Mundi is not by the hand of Leonardo da Vinci. Now, what a knot mathematician is looking for, they're looking for the intersection of two lines, whether the line goes over or under, and how many times it crosses. In this little tutorial, it's crossing 9 times, but the top loop and the bottom loop with a half a twist come undone. That's known today as a nugatory knot. Now, of course, knot math was not invented in Leonardo's 15th century, but he was in a league of his own as an artist and a mathematician, and he loves the nugatory knot, as I'm going to demonstrate for you. So the bottom row of the Mona Lisa knot with a half a twist, the whole pattern unravels and becomes a straight line. Today in knot math, this would be known as the Reidemeister move. It's a knot that's not a knot. Clever, very clever, Leonardo. Well, unlike the uncertainty of the authenticity of a Salvator Mundi, we all agree that the Mona Lisa behind her bulletproof box at the Louvre Museum is by the hand of Leonardo da Vinci. And like all Leonardo's paintings, his contemporaries copied them, as well as the Mona Lisa. But now I have a baseline. I can now look at all Mona Lisas and I could compare the embroidery pattern to Leonardo's found in the Louvre Museum. Well, one of them was known as the Islingworth Mona Lisa. It was held in a private collection. Just recently is sold to a consortium who's also, like the Salvator Mundi, is trying to authenticate it, saying that it's an original Leonardo da Vinci. They've changed the name of it. They now call it the earlier version Mona Lisa, saying that was done in 1490, where the Mona Lisa at the Louvre was done in 1503, some 10 years later. Well, they could say whatever they want, but never say that the knot pattern on the earlier version of Mona Lisa is by the hand of Leonardo da Vinci. Behind me, we'll see this. This is what Leonardo was doing in 1490. This is the only jewel pendant that he ever drew. It was housed at the Oxford Picture Gallery in Oxford, England, with another 4 standalone knot gems. Unfortunately, they've gone missing, all 5 sheets, since 1965. What a pity. It was as if Leonardo wanted to tell the world he had mastered the knots of antiquity. And after 1490, he never paints the knot of Isis, the eternity knot, the Solomon's knot again. From that moment forth, they will become his own creations, and they will become Leonardo's knots. Well, whoever did this earlier version, Mona Lisa, the embroidery pattern, was a journeyman at best. It had no knowledge about knot crossings. The top row, which should be a chain of octagon, is basically a mishmash of circles and oblongs. The bottom row, every time you see a red mark, it's an inconsistent knot crossing with the one at the Louvre Museum. And in the center, the 3 hexagons, no copyists. No copyists has successfully added 3 hexagons to the center of their pattern. And why? Because copyists thought they were copying an artist. Leonardo da Vinci was a mathematician that also was an artist. And I know he would have wanted his knot art included when authenticating a Salvator Mundi or an earlier version Mona Lisa. Well, this is known as the Accademia Vinciana knot series 1 through 6. 6 mandalas of interlocking extravaganza done by Leonardo da Vinci. Historians have been baffled on what was the purpose of this Accademia. Equally as baffling as why Leonardo's name is stamped in the center of each mandala with Accademia Leonardi or Vinci. Again, we don't know. All that remains is the beauty of the artwork. But like so many of Leonardo's knot artworks that have been lost, stolen, and destroyed, these that I'm showing you are facsimiles that were done by the German printmaker Albert Dürer. Dürer and Leonardo had met each other in Venice in 1507. And luckily for us, he copied them, so we at least have them. But since Dürer copied them 500 years, no one has examined them. Now, of course, in Leonardo's lifetime, his knot art was recognized. We even have the Renaissance art historian Giorgio Vasari in his book, Lives of His Artists. He writes about Leonardo's mandalas, and he says that they were composed by one single strand. Well, that is not the case. Again, with my collaboration with knot mathematician Dr. Rob Scharein, we put on the glasses of the 21st century and we mapped all 6 of Leonardo's mandalas. Each one is unique. Each one is different. Composed as few as 2 strands and as many as 36 strands. Each one is made up of a number of different knot crossings, 500, 758 to 1,783. I always have to remind myself, no computer. You know, all that was available for Leonardo was his mind and his hand. These are flawlessly intersecting in perfect symmetry. They're just, this one here on the screen is knot 5. And these are the components, the strands that merge out of knot 5. A lovely snowflake, a chain of nugatory rings with a half a twist come undone, an octagon embedded in its very circle. It's just hard to believe. And now I'm going to show you knot 5 like you have never seen before. Enjoy. Now, this is an interesting archaeological find that they just discovered in 2017. This was discovered in Gloucestershire, England. It was this lovely mosaic Roman villa. What excited the archaeologists was that they were now able to date the arc ages from the 4th century to the 5th century. But for me, what was exciting about this mosaic floor was the Solomon's knots in the pattern. Look at the one in the corner. So whoever this artist is, he starts the pattern to the left over, and then the subsequent other 2 is under. It's always the discretion of the artist how the pattern starts. And you too, next time you're going to lace up your shoes, you're going to be holding a string in each hand, and then you're going to start a sequence. And when you do, it will cross 3 times. And when you pull it, you will have done your first mathematical knot, a trifoil. So for Leonardo da Vinci, whenever he does a cruciform, his pattern is from right to left over. This is his trademark, his logo. Yes, I am telling you about a very, very minute detail. I'm talking about whether a line goes over or under, diagonally, whether it goes from right to left or left to right. But this was Leonardo's trademark. It's to get into his mindset on this minuscule scale. This is what I've witnessed. Well, we don't know that much about Leonardo personally. I mean, when you go through his notebooks, 99.99% is like reading an encyclopedia. He's the quintessential third-person observer of life. But this is one notebook page where we get a little glimpse into his life personally and professionally. Just turned 30 years old, and he got a new job with the Duke of Milan. That would be like working for the White House. Ever since he was a teenager, he's been at the Verrocchio studio in Florence, and now he's going to move 200 miles away to start a new life. In the upper left-hand corner, he sketches a young man with curly hair upside down with a brick hitting his head. Could it be a self-portrait? Parallel to the portrait is a pensive thought written vertically. We only find this a half a dozen times in his notebooks, and it reads, dimmi come sono passati, tell me how things worked out. Then he has a list to the right of possessions he deems important. And on the seventh line, he says, I'm going to bring lots of knots. And he uses the Milanese word groppi. Then in the upper right-hand corner, he does 4 squares freehand. The largest one is gridded in 4, and there's a little circle in the center, a spiral. Then the one to the left, gridded in 16, we have a circle and a square. And then the smallest one below, gridded in 6, we have an octagon. These 3 shapes, the circle, the square, and the octagon, Leonardo da Vinci will explore for the remainder of his life. Now, I had the Mona Lisa knot analyzed by knot mathematician Professor Ken Millay from the University of Santa Barbara, who subsequently published in the Mathematical Journal on Leonardo's knots. And I also had it analyzed by sacred geometer Keith Critchlow from London, very well-renowned, written several books on the subject. Well, what is sacred geometry? Well, it's the belief that God is the geometer of the world, and certain geometrical shapes, like the octagon, have symbolic meaning. Well, I thought it was important to get into Leonardo's mindset. Of course, when I learned about sacred geometry, now I can't pass by a flower without counting petals. Black Eye Susan 13, lilies 1, daisies 21. What about the pine cone? What a design marvel. It follows the Fibonacci pattern sequence perfectly. Well, what Critchlow, of course, the top of the Mona Lisa is given. It's a chain of octagons. But it was what Critchlow said about the bottom row that was surprising to me. So this anomaly I've been speaking about, 3 hexagons flanked by 2, 2, 2. Critchlow said that 3 represented male, 2 represented female. And what Leonardo was doing was representing all of mankind. In the cruciforms, Critchlow said that you would do an overlap, and what do you have? More octagons. And what he says in a nutshell is that the Mona Lisa knot is a celebration of the octagon. Well, of course, octagons have always had sacred meaning throughout the ages. Rejuvenation, totality, infinity, the power of 8. We find every religion has used this symbol, Judaism, Christianity, Muslim. But it took me a little while for this to sink in. Leonardo da Vinci painted octagons on his Mona Lisa. Ever since the age of 30, Leonardo da Vinci is a master painter. Anything he sees, he can paint with absolute perfection. And now I know that whatever he can paint, what he favors to paint are octagons. Now, an octagon is basically a man-made design from a circle and a square that transforms into an octagon. It's very rare to find 8 in nature. And you know what this now means for me. Now I've got to go back through these 7,000 pages, and I started having to index and catalog all Leonardo's octagons. And I'm here to tell you, I found them done in every conceivable way. Straight edge, free form, standalone, in action. And I get a very intimate look into the life of Leonardo da Vinci based on his octagon drawings. This is the last circle, square, and octagon Leonardo draws in his notebooks 3 years before he dies. He's in his studio. He's got the ink, the quill, the protractor, the straight edge. Does it vertically, traditionally. Circle at the top, representing the heavens. The square at the bottom, representing the earth. And that shape, it could transform into the octagon. But he does something he's never done before. He writes something in the center of this last octagon. He's never done that before. Out of the hundreds I've cataloged, this is the only one. And before I tell you what he wrote, let me paint you the context in which this artist, Leonardo da Vinci, painted this painting that we know of as the Mona Lisa. Well, first of all, he hasn't picked up a paintbrush in 10 years. The last portrait he did was the one I showed you, lady with the ermine, Cecilia, the Duke's mistress, galore in eternity knots. There's only two ways this painting could come into existence. It's either commissioned or freelance. Freelance was unheard of. You were a painter for hire. But I have reason to believe he did freelance it based on the next set of facts I'm about to tell you. So he starts the painting in Florence in 1503. And then he dies with this painting still in his possession some 16 years later. He's moved a lot in those 16 years. And he's horse and bugging a rather large poster-sized painting from Florence to Milan, back to Florence, then down to Rome. And then he takes the last 3 years of his life in the Loire Valley in France under King Francis I. And to the chagrins of the Italians. That's why the painting is at the Louvre in Paris and not the Uffizi in Italy. Now, the other interesting fact is when Leonardo dies with this painting in his possession, there is nobody from the Gioconda family that makes claim to it. And I don't care what century you live in. If you've made a monetary deposit, which would have been custom and practice, you're going to go and claim the painting. And we find no historical documentation of that fact, do we? No. Another interesting fact is that there are no preliminary drawings of the Mona Lisa in Leonardo's 7,000 pages. Now, that's more abnormal than normal. We have preliminary drawings of some of his most iconic paintings. Last Supper, Late in the Swan, even the painting that sold for 450, Salvator Mundi. We have preliminary drawings. But for the Mona Lisa, we have zero. Now, if I can say that octagons were the preliminary, well, then I've cataloged hundreds. And I'm here to tell you, without a shadow of a doubt, that the octagon was Leonardo da Vinci's most favorite shape to draw, and he never stops drawing eternity knots from the beginning of his career all the way to this end. Now, another as a student of Leonardo, it took me a long time to figure that out. And then it made total sense. You see, everything Leonardo ever studied and researched in art, science, math, life was a preliminary drawing for the Mona Lisa. And then the essence of that knowledge, he painted on a piece of poplar board, 30 inches in height, 21 inches in width. It was his capolavoro, his masterpiece, a legacy to himself for a lifetime of study. And we are the beneficiaries of this one man's journey. And that is why the Mona Lisa is the #1 painting in the world. Now, for Leonardo's 500th anniversary of his death, the National Geographic did this beautiful commemorative edition. The Renaissance man, as he's called, defined as an expert in many fields. And indeed, he left us an incredible body of work for a man that only lived 67 years. You could see that they used his famous Vitruvian man for the front cover. Again, framed in a circle and a square, a reoccurring theme for Leonardo, where I showed you where it germinated from that first notebook page, where he's exploring a circle and a square that could transform into an octagon. Now, there's an irony to Leonardo's life of self-study. You see, he's born out of wedlock, and he's never going to hold a professional title. Even Private Leonardo pens in his notebook the consequences of his birth. He says, "Sono un uomo senza lettere." I'm a man without letters. You see, he's never going to hold a professional title. He's never going to be a lawyer like his father and grandfather. He's never going to be a mathematician like his best friend and mentor, Luca Pacioli. He knows his fate. He knows that his fate, but it doesn't stop him for studying every subject under the sun, including the sun. Now, of course, today we value Leonardo da Vinci. Bill Gates of Microsoft bought the only Leonardo notebook codex in private collection. He spent $30 million in 1994, $1 million a page. But in Leonardo's lifetime, none of his writings were published. None of his cool inventions, the helicopter, the water shoes, the parachute, ever came to fruition. None of his paintings sold for millions of lire. And when he died, his notebooks had no value. As prolific as a writer as he was, he also favored the nonverbal world of interlocking knots. So much so that he dedicated a lifetime to knot crossings, and no copyist has successfully copied the Mona Lisa knot. It was his trademark, his logo, his thumbprint. And which I might add that the National Geographic did not include his knot artwork in their commemorative edition. And if I could toot my horn for one moment, I'm the only publication that pays tribute to this knot artwork. And I could tell you on this minuscule scale, you will also see the workmanship of a genius. Now, I don't have to tell you what a big deal it is, not only to be remembered, but celebrated, as we just celebrated Leonardo's 500th anniversary of his death. In this fickle world we live in of 15 minutes of fame, I'm sure if he came into this room right now and we told him, he'd probably blow his mind based on his track record. But then again, he might have been pleasantly pleased that he remained anchored to his Northern Star. Now, when I started this self-study 20 years ago, I was not looking for the greatest artist, mathematician, or the man who studied the tongue of a woodpecker. I was looking for Leonardo the human being, and the more I studied, researched, probed, I never found it until I stumbled upon the Mona Lisa knot. And then it begged the question, why Leonardo? Why the octagon? A shape never found in fashion and never on a frumpy green wool house dress. And it wasn't until I saw what he wrote in the last octagon that he wrote in his notebooks 3 years before he died that I got my answer. I knew it's what he would want everyone to know, what his life journey meant to him. Today, knowing what I know, I would have been highly disappointed in Leonardo had he not have painted octagons on his Mona Lisa. And so now, after 500 years, I'm going to tell you why Mona Lisa is really smiling, but more importantly, what a circle and a square that could transform into an octagon meant to Leonardo da Vinci. In sacred geometry, the squaring of the circle means a marriage between heaven and earth. And if Leonardo could pen his highest sentiments for the octagon, well, this is what he'd want you to know. This is what he wrote. Love conquers all. Who better than Leonardo, a man of humble beginnings that knew it doesn't matter whether you're rich, poor, educated, titled or not, we all have an opportunity to transform into something more beautiful. Love conquers all. Pass it along. And thank you, Google Talks, for having me today. This was really fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much, Caroline. This was such a fantastic, fascinating presentation. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your personal journey into the world of Leonardo's knots. I know you've been studying him for years.
Well, I didn't really, this did not start conventionally. So I did have a goal. I had a passion. I wanted to live in Rome, Italy. I know you normally do that when you're a junior in college, but I did it as an adult. And it was in 1999. 1999 was the best year to be in Rome. I mean, it became whistle clean. And like all countries, for the millennium, they had events planned. So for Italy, they had just gone through a 25-year restoration of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, and our friends were visiting from the States, and they wanted us to meet them and see it. Frankly, I thought the postcard was good enough. Much more concerned where I was going to eat lunch, but I thought it'd be cordial. Well, remember, Leonardo's Last Supper was crumbling in his lifetime. I mean, he used this newfangled plaster technique. So it started crumbling in his lifetime. Now, the scene that he depicts is that moment. It's a moment of action when Jesus says to one of his disciples, "One of you is going to betray me." And as strange as it is for me to language this, for some reason, I was there. So when I left, I'm like wondering, who is this Da Vinci guy? So when I got back to Rome, I lived across the street from an English bookstore. I bought a book on Leonardo, expecting to find an explanation, and that started me down a rabbit hole. And then it wasn't until I discovered the Mona Lisa knot that I know nothing can really glob onto your soul, but whatever happened left me. And then finally I had a purpose, and it was to find out about the Mona Lisa knot.
Wow, that's fantastic. So one of the details that really blew me away in your book, and you mentioned it earlier in your presentation as well, is that Da Vinci spent over a year just doing the Mona Lisa knot in the painting. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about why it took so long. I know he put a lot of detail into it, and that's a big part of the reason why, but why he put so much effort into it, and what you think that particularly meant to him.
He uses a painting technique as pointillism. So he must have just been doing it like just paint hair by paint hair. I mean, it must have just been so, small and meticulous. And I just think that, that was probably the reason where that's a different technique than the other parts of the painting. So I'm sure it took him, like I said, the preliminary drawing, he started 10 years earlier. So probably he had been working on this for a long, long time. And, this is, there was a artist by the name of Jacques Franck out of Paris who claims that he can reduplicate the Mona Lisa exactly in the style. He was able to figure out how Leonardo did the sfumato technique. See, when we x-ray the Mona Lisa, normally we'll get some information in the underdrawing. But when we x-ray the Mona Lisa, the board is blank. So we have no information on how he does this sfumato technique. So again, with the embroidery, it's something he had been working on probably all of his life.
Wow, that's fantastic and amazing. So you detailed a whole bunch of different knots: the knot of Isis, the Eternity knot, the Solomon knot. I was wondering if you had a particular knot that's your favorite that's in Leonardo's work, or that you think is especially the most significant.
Let's see, which one I think is most significant. He does a series of the Eternity knots, and remember, up to him, before him, these knots were just basically standalone, but what Leonardo does is he starts putting them into action. So he'll do these whole series of swords, and they're all a rendition of the Eternity knot. So he really takes that particular knot, and he runs with it. He does some really fun things with it that no other artist. Of course, he's doing architectural drawings, using the, using them in that capacity. But that part I really liked was just his love and how much fun he had with the Eternity knot.
That's great. That's great. So you just mentioned earlier as well that a lot of research has been done into the underlying imagery behind the Mona Lisa and all the X-rays and stuff. And I know you've done a documentary, Mona Lisa Revealed, that looks into that. And I was wondering if you could share some insights about that as well, about what sort of hidden imagery we might find beneath the surface.
Okay, really, all the fallacies that, he was really, there's really a guy underneath none of that's true. One of the he really doesn't make that many changes. The only change he really makes is the index finger. So we find evidence that he places it lower, and then in the final pictorial level, he moves it up a bit. But really, what's unusual also about the Mona Lisa is there's not that much restoration on it. So, and that's where, let's say, the lady with the ermine, a lot of restoration. The one that sold for 450 million, the Salvator Mundi, a lot of restoration. But really, on the Mona Lisa, hardly any at all.
That's fascinating. So you think it's likely because this is, his masterpiece and the culmination of all his work that he put in extra effort so that it held up a lot better than the others?
I think so. And also, a lot of people say this, they'll be in the Louvre and they'll be looking at the Mona Lisa, and wherever they move, her eyes follow them. Well, in his book on painting, he uses a particular painting that's called vert de gris. And that particular pigment has a 3D quality. So, like I said, all these things that knowledge that he gathered were all synthesized into the Mona Lisa painting.
Wow, that's fantastic. So you also mentioned that in addition to knots, you started to do all these studies into Leonardo's octagons. Are you going to be publishing anything following up on that particular aspect of his work?
I don't know specifically that. I think what I might do is a little further study on the three Salvator Mundis, the knot patterning systems that are on there. In one chapter I called The Final Twist, I go through the three Salvator Mundis and the lineage, and we've mapped all those knots found on those paintings. But there's some new evidence coming out, and I want to get a little further into the knot patterns on that painting.
Yeah, I found that aspect of the book incredibly fascinating too, how just by studying the knot patterns, you could basically authenticate whether or not we believe this to be a genuine Leonardo da Vinci or not.
Exactly. I don't know why the experts haven't gone there as of yet, but hopefully, they will start looking into Leonardo's knots and using that as a criteria as well.
Excellent. Any other further projects that you're going to be working on with respect to Leonardo or to Italian artwork?
Not presently. No, I just want to tell the whole world that Leonardo da Vinci painted octagons on his Mona Lisa. That's my big thing I would love to share with everyone.
Fantastic. I think the world is taking note right now. So
Thank you.
thank you so much, Caroline. This was really a fantastic presentation, and I hope everybody will check out Leonardo's Knots.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure.
All right.